Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, August 12th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel tells the U.S. that Iran is preparing a large-scale attack. So still no Iranian attack as of Sunday night when I am recording this, but Axios reported on Sunday that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has told Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that Iranian military preparations show Iran is preparing for a large-scale reprisal attack against Israel. The report said that a new Israeli intelligence assessment says that Iran is likely to launch an attack in response to the Israeli killing of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in the coming days. Israel, they initially thought Iran was going to respond right away. And then according to this report, they thought that Iran might be rethinking what they're going to do. But now they're saying again that there's going to be a big attack here. And if you remember, last week, Israeli officials discussed the idea of launching a preemptive strike on Iran if they had intelligence that indicated Iran was planning an attack on Israel. So keep that in mind, as if Israeli intelligence is saying an attack is coming, that might mean we might see another Israeli attack on Iran, which of course would just escalate things even further. Sources told Axios that Israeli intelligence believes Iran might launch the reprisal attack before Thursday. Thursday is the day that the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt said they wanted hostage negotiations between Israel and Hamas to restart. Not sure if that's going to happen. We'll get more into that in the next story. Iran's mission to the UN said on Sunday that Tehran is hoping its reprisal attack will not impede ceasefire negotiations. The mission said, and again, this is the Iran's mission to the UN. It said, quote, "We hope that our response will be timed and conducted in a manner not to detriment of the potential ceasefire," end quote. The U.S. is vowing to defend Israel. Of course, as we've been covering a lot lately, the U.S. has deployed military assets to the region, and it's likely that if Iran decides to go big here, that they're going to coordinate the attack with Hezbollah and the Houthis potentially, and maybe the militias in Iraq and Syria. So we'll see what happens this week. All right, the next story here. Hamas calls for the implementation of Biden's ceasefire proposal. On Sunday, Hamas released a statement calling for the implementation of a hostage and ceasefire deal with Israel that was previously unveiled by President Biden. Biden unveiled the proposal on May 31st, and it was backed by the UN Security Council in a resolution passed on June 10th. The proposal is for a three-phase deal that, if fully implemented, if they implement each phase, it would mean a permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Biden claimed that this proposal was approved by Israel. At the time, he called it an Israeli proposal. But Netanyahu rejected the idea of a permanent ceasefire. Biden came out and unveiled this big ceasefire proposal. Later that day, Netanyahu said, "I'm not agreeing to a permanent ceasefire." And then he later, there's kind of some back and forth, some negotiations. Really what happened was Netanyahu kept saying, like it was almost every day, that he would not end the genocidal war in Gaza, saying that he would have to restart it after any ceasefire deal. Then Hamas asked for stronger guarantees. They wanted a ceasefire up front, permanent commitment to a permanent ceasefire up front, and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza like right away. Israel, of course, said no to that, and then Hamas eventually conceded and said, okay, we'll go back to the original deal, which has vague language that Israel is happy enough with, that they think they don't have to actually commit to a permanent ceasefire. Then Netanyahu added all these new demands to sabotage the chances of a deal, and then he killed Hamas's political chief. So it's interesting to see that. So this is Hamas's response. You had the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt put out a statement saying, let's restart the negotiations. They want to start this Thursday. Hamas is saying we don't want to negotiate. We don't want to start new negotiations. They say that will provide cover for Israeli aggression. Instead, they're calling for this deal that Biden unveiled to be implemented. Hamas said in a statement, quote, "It demands that the mediators present a plan to implement what they proposed to the movement based on Biden's vision and the UN Security Council resolution and compel the occupation to comply," end quote. So they're telling the mediators, we want to do that deal, make it happen, get the Israelis on board. So kind of an interesting move by Hamas. So we'll see what happens here. What the U.S. says about this. And this demand, the talks have been suspended since Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh. And we're not sure what's going to happen. If there is a big Iranian attack and then another Israeli attack on Iran, who knows? Things could explode. But Qatar and Egypt believe that the only way Israel's going to agree to a deal is if the U.S. puts the pressure on Israel, and really using its leverage of military aid and things like that, which the U.S. hasn't done yet. But we'll see what the response is to this statement from Hamas. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to release $3.5 billion in military assistance for Israel. This article is from Kyle Anzalone. He wrote this on Friday. The State Department is set to release $3.5 billion in foreign military financing to Israel. And this, Kyle mentions that this massive transfer of funds comes as the White House is asking Israel to investigate claims of rape in its detention centers for Palestinians. And, there's video evidence now of this rape, really sick stuff going on in these torture centers for Palestinians. But $3.5 billion is on the way either way. And this is foreign military financing. FMF, this is a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to purchase U.S. weapons. Israel has a little exception to that. They're allowed to use some of those funds to buy Israeli-made weapons. They get that privilege. And it's not, so they're releasing these funds. We don't know what the deals are yet, what weapons are going to be purchased with these. But this is part of the $17 billion that was included for Israel in the huge $95 billion foreign military aid bill that President Biden signed into law in April. So this, of course, goes to show, we saw Kamala Harris the other day. She had more protesters at one of her events and say, hey, listen, I've said we need a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire right now. And that's what me and President Biden are working toward. But on the same day, we learned that the U.S. is giving the Israelis $3.5 billion in new military aid. And Israel's been, Netanyahu has been sabotaging the chances of a ceasefire, and they're rewarding him for that. So it's just a joke, this idea that they're, doing everything they can for a ceasefire. And then what happened right after the U.S. announced that they were giving $3.5 billion to Israel, and that's on top of the $3.8 billion that they get every year. So it's a lot of aid that the U.S. sends to Israel. And then the next one here, Israeli strike on Gaza school kills 100 people during dawn prayers. So this article is from Middle East Eye. This was another Israeli massacre of Palestinians that took place on Sunday morning. At least 100 Palestinian civilians, including women and children, were killed at dawn on Saturday after Israeli forces targeted a school in Gaza City while displaced people performed morning prayers. Another video appeared to show dozens of bodies covered in cloths and laid out in a courtyard. The victims of the attack were taken to the partially functioning Madana Hospital, one of the few operating hospitals in North Gaza. Motasem Dalul, an activist and resident of Gaza City, told Middle East Eye that the hospital does not have enough beds for the wounded, and many are being kept in the hallways. Really horrific videos, and pictures that came out of this. One video that he shared with Middle East Eye showed a young boy suffering from burns and wounds across his body. And there is, people going around and picking up body parts and putting them in bags. Some families, they haven't been able to identify the bodies. There's this horrific story in Mondo Weiss. Palestinians were saying that they were basically handed bags of body parts and saying, here's your loved one, you could go bury them. And they didn't even know if it was them. They were just gathering like body parts for burial and giving them to people. And Israel's claiming that that it was a Hamas command center. Eyewitnesses, people who were there, deny that, of course. And they say that there's nobody who was there that was armed. Israel claimed that they killed 19 people connected to Hamas, and over 100 people were killed in the strike. Someone who was there said that the school was targeted by 3 missiles, including at least one MK-84, which weighs 2,000 pounds. So these are these huge bombs that the U.S. gives Israel, and this is what they do with them. And more is on the way. All right, the next one here, the U.S. to fund Israeli unit that killed a Palestinian American. The State Department said on Friday that the U.S. will continue providing military aid to an Israeli military unit that was responsible for the death of a 78-year-old Palestinian American, Omar Assad. So in January 2022, Assad was detained by soldiers with the Netza Yehuda battalion at a temporary checkpoint in the West Bank. He was handcuffed, gagged, blindfolded, and left outside in the cold, where he died of a heart attack, which doctors said was stress-induced. None of the soldiers involved in the incident faced criminal charges, but the State Department said that the violations by the unit have been effectively remediated. A U.S. official told AFP that while no one was prosecuted for the killing, 2 of the soldiers involved were no longer in the military. Members of the Netza Yehuda battalion have been involved in similar incidents in the past. In 2021, 4 soldiers were held on suspicion of beating and sexually assaulting a Palestinian prisoner. Earlier this year, reports said that the U.S. was planning to sanction Netza Yehuda under the Leahy laws, which prohibit foreign assistance to security forces guilty of human rights violations. I remember that there was all these reports saying that they were going to sanction them, and then Israeli officials went on the offensive, really went on a lobbying campaign on behalf of this battalion, and they stopped the sanctions. It was successful, and the State Department said Friday, quote, "This unit can continue receiving security assistance from the United States of America," end quote. And this is just one battalion of the Israeli military. I know these guys have been involved in fighting in Gaza, but we have mountains of evidence of human rights violations committed by the IDF. State Department claims that they released a report because some of these foreign assistance laws required them to release a report on Israel's whether or not they're violating international law. And basically what it said was, yeah, they probably are, but we don't have any evidence, so we're going to keep giving them weapons anyway. Just completely pathetic. I mean, there's so much evidence, but they claim that there's not. All right, so the next one here, Israeli settlers hold a gun to a 3-year-old Palestinian girl's head. This article is from the New Arab, but this was reported by Israeli media initially. Violent Israeli settlers held a gun to a 3-year-old Palestinian girl's head, pelted the family with stones, and burned their car after the family made a wrong turn into a settlement in the occupied West Bank on Friday. According to Israeli media, the Al-Jar family were traveling to the occupied West Bank city of Nablus when they made a wrong turn into the Givat Ronin settlement. Nofa, the mother, told the Israeli news site Ynet that the navigation system they were using in the car misled them, taking them off the main road into a side route that went into the Israeli settlement. She said, quote, "The settlers started running after us. We turned the car around because we wanted to escape from the scene, but there was no way out. You can't go back. You can't move forward. Many people ran in our direction. 2 had guns after they broke all the windows. 1 raised a gun and our little girl started screaming. They asked, 'Are you from the territories? Did you come from Gaza? Do you have anyone from Gaza? We want to kill you,' they told us," end quote. The report states the settlers then sprayed the family with tear gas, chasing them away, and pelted their car with stones. The family told Ynet, quote, "We called the police, but there was no sense of urgency. What did we do? We saw death before our eyes. They wanted to kill us. After that, they burned our car before the police arrived. They put a gun to my 3-year-old's head," end quote. So this is the kind of what, the settlers, they really terrorize people in the West Bank. Whether they're going to their homes to try to push them out of their houses and steal their land, or if, they wind up making a wrong turn. This is the kind of stories that you hear, really horrific stuff. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces shoot a U.S. citizen in the occupied West Bank. This is another one from Middle East Eye. Israeli forces shot and injured an American citizen during a demonstration on Friday that was being held in Baita, a Palestinian village near the occupied West Bank town of Nablus. Several Palestinian rights organizations have told Middle East Eye. Amado Saisan, which is an alias that this American citizen is using, was hit by a bullet that shot through the back of his right thigh and left a large exit wound. The bullet, however, missed all of his major arteries and his bones, but he has soft tissue damage from the attack. So he was carried more than 500 meters as Israeli forces continued to attack the Palestinians gathered at the site of the demonstration. After being shot, activists say that Saisan's ambulance was forced to stop at several Israeli checkpoints, leading to a delay in his medical treatment. Eventually, he underwent successful surgery and was seen smiling in the hospital room. State Department spokesman told Middle East Eye that Washington was aware of the incident and was in contact with local authorities to get more information, saying, they're always saying that they're going to look into it. The shooting took place against the backdrop of a 6-week-long campaign by Israeli settlers, accompanied by Israeli soldiers who were antagonizing the Palestinian residents of Baita. In June, the Israeli Security Cabinet legalized the illegal Avyatar settlement in this area, and it has since been repopulated with Israeli settlers, so I'm sure they have their eyes on more land there. So they were demonstrating against that settlement. All right, so the next one here, several U.S. troops injured in a drone attack in Syria. So several U.S. troops and other members of a U.S.-led coalition were injured in a Friday drone attack on a U.S. base in northeast Syria. The U.S. military initially said there were no casualties in the attack, but later found minor injuries, including smoke inhalation, and some personnel are being evaluated for traumatic brain injuries. No one has taken credit for the attack on the base, which is known as the Rumelin landing zone. This is really northeast Syria, kind of near Turkey. Iraqi Shia militias have launched a similar, so nobody's taking credit, but we know the Iraqi Shia militias have launched similar attacks. On Sunday, the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that a strike in eastern Syria's Deir ez-Zor province killed 5 pro-Iran fighters, which is a reference to the Iraqi Shia militias that operate in the area. So you had the rocket attack on the U.S. base on Friday. We learned on Saturday that some U.S. troops were injured. And then on Sunday, there was airstrikes in eastern Syria targeting the Shia militias. But nobody attributed blame for that strike. It's not clear who did that. The U.S. and Israel both have a history of launching airstrikes in this part of Syria. The U.S. hasn't announced any airstrikes, and Israel usually doesn't say anything about their airstrikes in Syria, so we don't really know right now. But this attack on the U.S. base in Syria came a few days after U.S. troops were injured in Iraq. So, this could keep happening. This is why the U.S. just has to leave Iraq and Syria. It's just a danger, putting these troops in danger, and it's a tripwire for war. And if there is a big Iranian reprisal on Israel that's coordinated with all their allies, I think there's a good chance that we might see attacks on these bases as part of that. I think Iran would want to avoid the direct confrontation with the U.S., but I think there's a chance that the militias, they want the U.S. to get out, that they might really ramp up the attacks on the U.S., kind of amid the chaos. So we'll see, these attacks continue. The U.S. launched some heavy airstrikes in Iraq last week that killed 4 members of the PMF, but the rocket and drone attacks on the U.S. continue. All right, the next one here. Damascus calls on occupying U.S. forces to stop bombing Syria. This article is from the Cradle. So on August 10th, Saturday, Syria called on the United States to stop bombing Syrians, stop supporting Kurdish separatist militias, and immediately withdraw from Syrian territory. A statement issued by the Syrian Foreign Ministry said, quote, U.S. warplanes with the support of the SDF militia launched several raids in Deir ez-Zor, Hasaka, and Kamishli, targeting innocent civilians defending their families, villages, and properties, end quote. So this is those clashes that have been going on in eastern Syria and Deir ez-Zor between the Arab tribes and the U.S.-backed SDF, which is the Kurds. And there's been these reports about U.S. helicopters giving the SDF support, air support. That's something we haven't seen the U.S. military confirm, but usually with things like this, they're not too. The U.S. isn't too public about what they're doing when it comes to actually fighting with the SDF. So earlier, a Syrian security source told Sputnik that U.S. helicopters bombed several villages in the eastern countryside of Deir ez-Zor, enabling the SDF to regain the villages and towns that they lost 2 days ago after violent battles with Syrian government-backed tribal forces. The statement added, quote, the SDF, which is an agent of the American occupation, launched criminal attacks on our people. These barbaric attacks led to the martyrdom of a number of Syrian citizens, including women and children. The SDF is also saying that 13 civilians were killed by the Syrian attacks. So it's just another battle in Syria. There's just so many different conflicts within Syria, and the U.S. is involved in this one pretty heavily. All right, so the next one here, Israeli drone strike on motorcycle kills 2 in southern Lebanon. This one is from Jason Ditz. Israel carried out a drone strike against a motorcycle on Sunday afternoon in the southern Lebanese town of Taiba. The attack killed 2 people whom Israeli army radio claimed were Hezbollah members. The slain were not conclusively identified. Lebanese sources said that one of them was a civilian. Initial reports incorrectly said one killed and the other was badly wounded, but it looks like they're both killed. So this is the strikes, throughout the weekend. Israel was bombing Lebanon. Hezbollah was firing rockets and drones into northern Israel. On Sunday night, looked like Hezbollah fired quite a few rockets. It looked big, but it still didn't seem like a big escalate, like anything dramatically bigger than what we've been seeing, what we might see as a response to Hezbollah, Israel killing Hezbollah's military commander in Beirut. They're still saying that they're going to take revenge for that. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky acknowledges offensive in Russia's Kursk. So on Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged for the first time Ukraine's U.S.-backed ground incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast, which began on August 6th. Zelensky said in his nightly address that the Ukrainian military was, quote, working to push the war out into the aggressor's territory, proving that it really knows how to restore justice and guarantees exactly the kind of pressure that is needed, pressure on the aggressor, end quote. Fighting has been raging in Kursk since Ukraine launched its invasion, and the Russian Defense Ministry said on Sunday that its forces prevented a deep breakthrough into Russian territory. The Russian Defense Ministry is claiming that since August 6th, Ukrainian forces have lost 1,350 soldiers in Kursk, but that number isn't confirmed since Ukraine doesn't release information about its casualties, but it's pretty clear that the fighting has been very heavy. The Russian Defense Ministry also said that its forces destroyed 29 tanks, 23 armored personnel carriers, 9 infantry fighting vehicles, 116 armored combat vehicles, 20 cars, some anti-aircraft missile launchers, so a Patriot anti-aircraft missile system. So there's a lot of firepower, that Ukraine brought in. Local officials said that 15 civilians were wounded when debris from a Ukrainian missile hit by Russian air defenses fell on a residential building. This was on Sunday. So it was a Ukrainian missile that was intercepted, and then it fell on this residential building. 15 people injured. No, it doesn't look like anybody was killed. But the U.S. is supporting this. I mean, this is a huge, huge escalation of the proxy war. The fact that the U.S. is openly backing a ground invasion of Russia, and they have U.S. weapons. I mean, the risk of escalation is huge here. Russia is saying that they're going to respond in a big way. We'll probably see very heavy strikes, across Ukraine. The defense ministry, the Russians are saying that they keep saying that they're thwarting like a big breakthrough, but again, there's still heavy fighting going on here. It doesn't seem like it's affecting Russia elsewhere on the front as they're making gains in the east. They're continuing to make gains in Donetsk, and we'll see what the long-term implication of this is for the Ukrainian forces. If they're definitely taking heavy losses. We might not know the exact numbers, but it certainly seems like they're losing a lot of people. So that could, hurt them in the long run. But we will see how this all plays out. And it's just, man, again, the fact that the Pentagon says, yes, Ukraine can use U.S. weapons in Kursk. They said that the U.S., they don't want them launching long-range strikes with U.S. missiles. But they're not defining that. They're not defining what's long range. And Zelensky is asking for those restrictions to be lifted still. He said that on Sunday. All right, so the next one here. Ukrainian shelling causes fire at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So Ukrainian shelling started a fire at one of the cooling towers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, according to Zaporizhzhia's Russian-installed governor, Yevgeny Balitsky. So Zaporizhzhia is one of the southern Ukrainian provinces, oblasts that's mostly controlled by Russian forces. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, said that its experts stationed at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant saw dark smoke rising at the plant after hearing multiple explosions. And this nuclear power plant has been controlled by Russia since the very first days of the invasion, since February 2022. I remember when the invasion started and you saw these videos of Russian soldiers like entering a nuclear power plant. But so the IAEA officials said that they were told by the plant officials that a Ukrainian drone attack targeted the cooling tower. The IAEA said that there was no reported impact on nuclear safety as a result of the fire, and Balitsky said radiation levels around the plant were normal, which is good. I mean, the video you see looks like a big fire at from these cooling towers, from one of the cooling towers. So Zelensky is claiming that the fire was started by Russians. I mean, Russia controls the power plant. It's a nuclear power plant. I do not see what benefit they would get from starting a fire there. This has happened throughout the war, that this power plant has been shelled, or really the area around it. But sometimes, parts of the plant have been hit, like substations, or in this case, a cooling tower. And whenever that happens, Ukraine blames it on Russia. Russia blames it on Ukraine. I think it is much more likely that it's Ukraine is responsible for the attacks on the plant because it's controlled by Russia. No benefit to bombing a nuclear power plant that you are in control of, even for propaganda purposes. Because if you look at, if it is for propaganda purposes, it's not working, because all of the Western media reports these as, is reporting this fire as Russia starting the fire based on what Zelensky said. And there's just no evidence of that. I mean, I guess you could argue there's no evidence it was a Ukrainian drone attack, but it's much more likely that Russia did not start a fire purposely at a nuclear power plant that they control. But it doesn't matter. Again, all the headlines are Russia starts fire at nuclear power plant. And the way that where this power plant is situated, it's on the southern bank of the Dnieper River. And so all the territory on the southern bank is controlled by Russia, and all the territory on the other side is controlled by Ukraine. So there's a natural barrier there between the two sides. And Ukraine has tried to retake the power plant. They've launched raids across the river and those have failed. I don't think that's happened in a while, but I know in 2022 they tried to retake it a few times. All right, so the next one here, Biden to resume offensive weapons sales to the Saudis. This is the last story here. This is one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. The White House is set to approve an offensive arms sale to Saudi Arabia. After taking office in 2021, Biden curbed some weapon sales to Riyadh. On Friday, Reuters reported that the State Department will lift the ban on offensive weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. An official told the outlet, quote, "We will consider new transfers on a typical case-by-case basis consistent with the conventional arms transfer policy," end quote. The move paves the way for the U.S. to ship air-to-ground munitions to Saudi Arabia. So the U.S., Biden did say, we're going to stop sending offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia when he first came into office as an effort to end the war in Yemen. It was late. He said he was going to stop all offensive support. They did go through with some arms sales after that, but no air-to-ground munitions. But they did provide offensive support. The U.S. continued to maintain the Saudi Air Force. Saudi warplanes that were bombing Yemen, the U.S. continued to help enforce the blockade on Yemen. So he did not live up to that promise, but there has been a limit to the arms sales. And they're saying that what's kind of funny is that they're saying this is because the ceasefire has held between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. They say, good job for holding up the ceasefire. We'll give you some offensive weapons. In the meantime, the U.S. is bombing the Houthis now. Now the U.S. is at war with the Houthis. And the Saudis don't want anything to do with it, which is really incredible as someone who followed the war in Yemen very closely. Just, the brutality of it, the Saudi brutality in that war, to see the U.S. being now the more belligerent, it's just something. And the Saudis don't want anything to do with it. But anyway, so we might see some arms sales there. I wonder, I bet that they want the Saudis to restart that war against the Houthis at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if that's something that they might be pushing for. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Rick Sterling. U.S. elites fail to sink Chinese swimmers. One from Ray McGovern. Decay, decrepitude, deceit in journalism. One from Lenny Breutman. A Russiagate conspiracy theorist's connection to South Korean intelligence. It's about Max Boot's wife, who has been... she's being prosecuted, I think, under a FARA with her ties to South Korea. One from Ted Snyder, the U.S. has no right to interfere in Venezuela's election. And one from James Banford, Israel's assassination program and its ties to U.S. intel. So please go check all of that out. Lots of stuff that we went over today. You could always support this show by telling your friends about it, sharing it, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Follow us on X, Instagram. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.